What you're about to hear represents the most consequential pattern in human history, and it is repeating itself right now in real time. In the last 72 hours, developments have occurred that mark the beginning of the end of American dominance in the Middle East, and every single indicator that preceded the collapse of previous empires is now flashing red in Washington. This is not hyperbole. This is not speculation. This is structural analysis of forces that have destroyed every empire that attempted what America is attempting right now. There is a pattern so consistent, so brutal, so inevitable that it has played out across 3,000 years of recorded history. Every empire that sought to control the Middle East through military force followed the same trajectory. Every single one believed it was different. Every single one believed its technology, its wealth, its determination would break the pattern, and every single one collapsed in the attempt. The Assyrians, the Persians under Cyrus, the Greeks under Alexander, Rome, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the British Empire, the Soviet Union. They all followed the same path. They all reached the same final stage, and America has just entered that stage. What happened this week is not just another development in an ongoing conflict. It represents the crossing of a threshold that no empire has ever crossed and survived. The question that will drive everything that follows is simple but devastating. How does the most powerful military in human history avoid the fate of every empire that came before it? Three structural forces will answer that question. By the end of this analysis, you will understand why the pattern is repeating, why it cannot be stopped, and what the final stage looks like when it arrives. Let me be absolutely clear about what we are examining tonight. This is not about whether you support American foreign policy or oppose it. This is not about ideology. This is about game theory, historical pattern recognition, and structural forces that operate regardless of human preference. The empire trap has claimed every previous power that attempted Middle Eastern control. Understanding why requires examining three dimensions that establishment analysts refuse to acknowledge. Here's the first structural force you need to understand. Every empire that attempted to control the Middle East made the same fundamental miscalculation. They believed that military superiority would translate into political control. They were wrong, every single time. The reason is geographic, economic, and civilizational, and it operates independent of technology level or force deployment. The Middle East sits at the intersection of three continents. It contains the world's most critical energy resources. It hosts some of the oldest continuous civilizations in human history. These three factors create a structural trap. Any empire that attempts control must simultaneously manage European interests, Asian interests, and African interests, while suppressing indigenous resistance movements that have thousands of years of practice resisting foreign occupation. The military force required to accomplish this exceeds the economic capacity of the occupying empire, always, without exception. Let me give you the numbers that prove this pattern. The Assyrian Empire at its peak controlled the entire Fertile Crescent. It maintained the largest professional military force in the ancient world. Garrison forces numbered over 200,000 soldiers. The annual military budget consumed 40% of imperial revenue. Within one generation of achieving maximum territorial control, the empire collapsed into civil war and was completely destroyed. The capital city, Nineveh, was so thoroughly annihilated that its location was lost for 2,000 years. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire with an army of 40,000 Macedonians. He defeated forces 10 times his size through superior tactics and technology. He controlled territory from Greece to India. He died at 32 years old, and his empire immediately fragmented into warring factions. Within 20 years of his death, the entire structure had collapsed. The dynasty that inherited Persia, the Seleucids, spent the next 2 centuries slowly losing territory until nothing remained. Rome fought Parthia and later Persia for over 300 years. Rome possessed the most advanced military technology in the ancient world, the largest professional army ever assembled, and economic resources that dwarfed its adversaries. Rome never achieved lasting control of Mesopotamia. Every conquest was temporary. Every garrison was eventually withdrawn or destroyed. The eastern frontier consumed increasingly large percentages of imperial military capacity. By the 4th century, maintaining the Persian frontier required half of Rome's total military force. Rome fell. Persia survived. The pattern repeats because the structural forces remain constant. The cost of occupation exceeds the value extracted. The resistance never stops. The empire bleeds resources until it can no longer maintain core territories. Then collapse comes suddenly. Now let me explain the second structural force, and this is where American policymakers have made their fatal error. Every previous empire eventually recognized the trap and withdrew before terminal damage occurred. America has passed that point. The structural commitments America has made in the Middle East cannot be abandoned without triggering global economic collapse. This is fundamentally different from previous empires. Rome could withdraw from Mesopotamia and survive. Britain could withdraw from the Middle East and survive. America cannot, and that changes everything. Here is why. The petrodollar system requires American military dominance of Middle Eastern energy resources. This is not a secondary interest. This is the foundation of American global power. Since 1973, oil has been priced exclusively in dollars. This creates structural demand for dollars from every country that imports energy. That demand allows America to run unlimited trade deficits while maintaining currency stability. It allows America to print money without triggering inflation. It allows America to maintain military spending that exceeds the next 9 countries combined. The numbers are staggering. Global oil trade represents approximately $4 trillion annually. Every barrel of oil sold anywhere in the world requires dollar acquisition. This creates approximately $2 trillion in structural dollar demand every year just from energy trade. Add petrochemical products, fertilizers, and plastics derived from oil, and the total dollar demand from petroleum-based trade exceeds $3 trillion annually. If Middle Eastern oil producers switch to alternative currencies, that structural demand disappears. If it disappears, dollar demand collapses. If dollar demand collapses, the United States cannot finance its federal deficit. Current deficit spending runs approximately $2 trillion per year. Without petrodollar recycling, that deficit becomes unsustainable within one fiscal year. Interest rates would spike to double digits. Federal spending would require cuts exceeding 50%. Social Security, Medicare, military spending, everything would face devastating reductions simultaneously. This structural dependency means America cannot withdraw from the Middle East the way previous empires could. Britain faced economic damage from Middle Eastern withdrawal but survived. America faces potential economic collapse. This transforms the traditional empire trap into something far more dangerous. Previous empires could cut their losses. America must double down, and that guarantees the pattern will complete its final stage. Let me show you exactly how this trap has been constructed over the last 50 years. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War triggered an oil embargo. Oil prices quadrupled. The American economy entered severe recession. Treasury Secretary William Simon negotiated an agreement with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would price oil exclusively in dollars and invest their surplus revenues in U.S. Treasury bonds. In exchange, America would provide military protection and unlimited weapons sales. This agreement created the petrodollar system. It solved America's immediate economic crisis. It also created the structural dependency that now prevents withdrawal. Every subsequent Middle Eastern intervention has been designed to protect this arrangement. The Gulf War in 1991 was triggered when Saddam Hussein threatened Saudi Arabia. The Iraq War in 2003 was triggered when Saddam began accepting euros for oil sales. The Libya intervention in 2011 was triggered when Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency for oil trade. The pattern is consistent. Any threat to dollar-denominated oil trade triggers American military intervention. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented policy. The interventions are not about democracy or human rights or weapons of mass destruction. Those are justifications for domestic consumption. The actual motivation is protecting the petrodollar system because without it, American economic hegemony collapses. Now here is what happened this week that marks the final stage. Saudi Arabia just announced it will accept yuan for Chinese oil purchases. This represents the first major crack in the petrodollar system since its creation 50 years ago. The Saudis are not abandoning dollars completely. Not yet. But they are creating alternative payment mechanisms. Once those mechanisms exist, other producers will use them. The structural dollar demand will begin declining. And America has no military solution to this problem. Think about what this means in game theory terms. America cannot invade Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the linchpin of the petrodollar system. Military action against the Saudis would immediately trigger the exact collapse the intervention would aim to prevent. America cannot sanction Saudi Arabia effectively. The Saudis control oil prices. If they choose to spike oil to $200 per barrel, the American economy enters immediate recession. America cannot offer the Saudis anything more valuable than Chinese partnership. China is Saudi Arabia's largest oil customer and provides massive infrastructure investment without political conditions. This is the structural trap completing its final stage. America needs the Saudis more than the Saudis need America. The moment that power relationship inverts, the empire enters terminal decline. That inversion just occurred. and every previous empire that reached this stage followed the same trajectory afterward. Let me give you the historical parallel that explains what comes next. The British Empire faced the exact same structural trap in the Middle East between 1914 and 1956. Britain controlled Middle Eastern oil through military occupation and puppet governments. British currency was the global reserve currency because of this control. As long as energy flowed through British-controlled channels and was priced in sterling, Britain maintained global financial dominance. But maintaining that control required ever-increasing military expenditure. The Arab Revolt during World War I, the Iraqi uprising in 1920, the Palestinian Revolt in 1936. Each resistance movement required larger garrison forces and more military spending. By 1945, the cost of maintaining Middle Eastern control exceeded the economic benefit. Britain was spending more money occupying the region than it extracted in oil revenues and financial flows. The Suez Crisis in 1956 marked the final stage. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain, France, and Israel launched military intervention to reverse the nationalization. The United States forced Britain to withdraw. Britain could no longer project military power against the wishes of a regional government. The sterling area collapsed within 18 months. Britain lost reserve currency status. The empire entered terminal decline. The parallel is exact. Britain required Middle Eastern control to maintain financial hegemony. The cost of control eventually exceeded the capacity to pay. A regional power challenged British dominance. Britain could not respond effectively. Financial hegemony collapsed. The empire ended. America is following the identical trajectory. American military spending in the Middle East has exceeded $3 trillion since 2001. That number includes direct war costs in Iraq and Afghanistan, ongoing operations in Syria, support for Saudi operations in Yemen, and military aid to Israel and other regional partners. $3 trillion spent. What has America gained? Iraq is now aligned with Iran. Afghanistan is controlled by the Taliban. Syria survived American intervention and remains allied with Russia and Iran. Yemen defeated the Saudi intervention. The regional balance of power has shifted against American interests despite unprecedented military expenditure. The cost-benefit analysis is devastating. $3 trillion spent. Regional influence declining. And now the Saudis are creating alternative payment systems that will undermine the very petrodollar system the interventions were designed to protect. This is the final stage. Maximum expenditure producing negative returns. Now let me explain the third structural force, and this is the one that makes the pattern absolutely inevitable. Every empire that entered the Middle East trap eventually faced the same choice. Accept defeat and withdraw, preserving enough resources to manage the decline, or escalate further, attempting to break the pattern through even greater force application. Every empire that chose escalation accelerated its own collapse. The Mongols chose escalation. After conquering Persia, they faced persistent rebellion. Hulagu Khan believed that sufficient brutality would break resistance. The Mongol forces destroyed Baghdad in 1258. Contemporary accounts suggest 1 million people were killed. The Tigris River ran black with ink from destroyed libraries and red with blood from slaughtered citizens. This was meant to terrify the region into submission. It failed. Resistance continued. The Mongols committed increasing forces to occupation. Within 2 generations, the Mongol Empire had fragmented. The Ilkhanate that controlled Persia became Persian. They adopted Persian language, Persian culture, Persian administrative systems. The conquerors were absorbed by the conquered. The empire that prided itself on military invincibility was transformed into another Middle Eastern dynasty that eventually collapsed. The Ottomans chose escalation. By the 16th century, they controlled the entire Middle East. They faced persistent rebellion in Arabian Peninsula, Mesopotamia, and Levant. Rather than accept limited control, they implemented increasingly harsh occupation policies. The Armenian genocide in 1915 was the culmination of this escalation. The Ottomans believed that eliminating potential resistance populations would secure their control. It failed. Arab Revolt in 1916. British and French invasion. By 1923, the Ottoman Empire had ceased to exist. 600 years of imperial history ended because the empire chose escalation over adaptation. The Soviet Union chose escalation. Afghanistan represented Soviet attempt to extend influence into the Middle East periphery. Initial intervention in 1979 involved 80,000 troops. As resistance intensified, the Soviets escalated to 120,000 troops. They employed scorched earth tactics. They deliberately destroyed agricultural infrastructure to eliminate resistance support. They accepted massive civilian casualties as necessary cost of victory. It failed. The Afghan resistance adapted to every escalation. By 1989, the Soviet Union withdrew in defeat. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union collapsed entirely. The Afghanistan intervention did not single-handedly destroy the Soviet Union, but it accelerated every structural weakness. Military spending reached unsustainable levels. Public confidence in the system eroded. The legitimacy of the entire political structure was questioned. Afghanistan was the catalyst for terminal decline. Now examine where America stands. Every escalation has failed to achieve objectives. Every intervention has generated more resistance. And America is now facing the same choice every previous empire faced: accept the loss of Middle Eastern control and manage the resulting economic damage, or escalate further and attempt to break the pattern. All evidence suggests America will choose escalation. The political system cannot accept retreat. The economic system cannot survive without petrodollar recycling. The military-industrial complex profits from continued intervention. Every institutional incentive points toward escalation, and that means America will follow the same trajectory as every previous empire that made the same choice. Let me give you the specific scenario that is now developing, because this is where the pattern enters its most dangerous phase. America cannot invade Iran directly without triggering catastrophic consequences. Iran has spent 45 years preparing for exactly this conflict. Iranian defensive doctrine is based on making occupation impossible through geographic advantage, asymmetric warfare, and alliance structures that would turn regional invasion into multi-front war. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. The population is 85 million compared to Iraq's 40 million in 2003. The terrain is mountainous rather than desert. The Zagros Mountains form a natural defensive barrier that no empire has ever successfully conquered through force. Military estimates suggest that controlling Iranian territory would require 4 to 5 million troops. America cannot deploy forces at that scale. The active-duty U.S. military is 1.3 million personnel. Mobilizing 4 million troops would require a draft unprecedented in American history. But America cannot accept Iranian regional dominance either. Iran now effectively controls Iraq through political influence and militia networks. Iran controls Lebanon through Hezbollah. Iran controls significant Syrian territory through direct presence and proxy forces. Iran supports Houthi forces in Yemen that have demonstrated capability to threaten Saudi oil infrastructure and Red Sea shipping. Iranian influence extends from Mediterranean to Arabian Sea. This creates impossible strategic dilemma. America cannot defeat Iran militarily at acceptable cost. America cannot accept Iranian regional dominance without losing petrodollar system. This is the classic final stage trap. No winning options. Only choice between different forms of defeat. The historical pattern says America will attempt limited escalation. Not full invasion, but expanded airstrikes, special operations, support for proxy forces, and economic warfare designed to trigger Iranian collapse without direct occupation. This is exactly what every previous empire attempted in the final stage. It has never worked. It will not work now. Here is why. Limited escalation plays to Iranian strengths. Iran has optimized its entire defense structure for exactly this scenario. Dispersed missile forces that cannot be destroyed by airstrikes. Proxy networks that operate independently of central command. Economic structures designed to survive sanctions. Political legitimacy based on resistance to foreign pressure rather than economic performance. Limited escalation will produce exactly one outcome. It will demonstrate American inability to achieve objectives through military force. That demonstration will accelerate the global move away from dollar-denominated trade. Other regional powers will recognize that America cannot enforce its preferences militarily. The petrodollar system will unravel faster than it would have through gradual Saudi diversification. This is the final stage. The empire recognizes it is trapped. It cannot retreat without economic collapse. It cannot escalate effectively. So it attempts limited action that fails to achieve objectives while accelerating the underlying decline. Every empire that reached this stage collapsed within 1 generation. Let me give you the timeline prediction based on structural analysis. The Saudi decision to accept yuan for oil sales will expand to other currencies within 24 months. By 2027, multiple Middle Eastern producers will be accepting non-dollar payment for significant percentages of their oil exports. The structural dollar demand from energy trade will have declined by 20 to 30%. This decline will force Federal Reserve response. Interest rates will need to rise to maintain dollar demand through financial returns rather than structural trade requirements. Higher interest rates will trigger recession in the American economy. Federal deficit will become increasingly difficult to finance. Political pressure for military action will intensify. Between 2027 and 2030, America will face the final choice: accept managed decline of petrodollar system and resulting economic adjustment, or attempt major military escalation in Middle East designed to restore dominance. Based on every historical precedent, America will choose escalation. That escalation will fail, and the failure will mark the end of American financial hegemony. The pattern is completing exactly as it has throughout history. The only variable is how violently the final stage plays out. Previous empires that accepted reality and withdrew suffered economic damage but survived in diminished form. Previous empires that chose desperate escalation collapsed entirely and ceased to exist as coherent political entities. I want to be absolutely clear about what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not rooting for American collapse. I am not celebrating potential economic crisis that would affect hundreds of millions of people. I am analyzing structural forces that operate independent of preference. The empire trap has claimed every previous power that entered it. Understanding why that pattern repeats is essential for comprehending what happens next. The framework we have applied tonight is predictive history using game theory and structural analysis. We examined the geographic trap that makes Middle Eastern control economically impossible to sustain. We analyzed the petrodollar dependency that prevents American withdrawal. We documented the historical pattern where final stage empires choose escalation and accelerate their own collapse. And we projected the timeline for how this pattern will complete over the next 3 to 7 years. This framework is falsifiable. If Saudi Arabia reverses its currency diversification, the timeline extends. If America develops alternative sources of structural dollar demand that replace petrodollar recycling, the trap may be avoided. If regional resistance movements collapse, the occupation cost equation changes. I am not claiming certainty about specific events. I am claiming that the structural forces create overwhelming probability toward the pattern repeating. We will continue to watch these developments closely. As the situation evolves, we will analyze each new development through this same structural framework. The most important thing you can do is think critically about this analysis. Question the evidence. Test the logic. Examine whether the pattern recognition holds up under scrutiny. The goal is never to accept any analysis uncritically, but to develop your own framework for understanding why empires rise and fall according to patterns that repeat across centuries. History does not forgive those who ignore its lessons. Every empire believes it is exceptional until the pattern proves otherwise. We are watching that proof develop in real time. The question is not whether the pattern will complete, but whether American leadership will recognize it in time to manage the decline rather than accelerate it through desperate escalation. Based on every structural incentive in the current system, that recognition will not occur. And that means we are watching the final stage of American dominance in the Middle East play out exactly as it has for every empire that came before. The pattern has repeated for 3,000 years. It is repeating now. And by understanding these forces, you are no longer a passive observer of current events, but someone who recognizes the deeper structural dynamics that will shape the next decade of global history. That understanding is the most valuable thing any analysis can provide.